Every night at midnight she whispers the same desperate words through my bedroom door. But loving someone sometimes means learning to say no. The first time it happened, he thought it was just a bad dream. The sound of his bedroom door creaking open at midnight made him stir from sleep. Through half-closed eyes he saw a figure standing in the doorway. His heart jumped for a second before he realized it was his younger sister. She had been living with him for 3 weeks now. Her marriage had fallen apart, and she needed somewhere to stay while she figured things out. He was her big brother, after all. Family helps family. That's what their parents had always taught them. "I can't sleep," she whispered, her voice shaky in the darkness. "Can I stay here tonight? I just need someone close." He was tired and confused, but he could hear the pain in her voice. His bed was big enough, and she was his sister. What harm could it do? He moved over and made room for her. She slipped under the covers, staying on her side while he stayed on his. Within minutes, her breathing became steady and calm. She was finally able to rest. The next morning, she was gone before he woke up. Back to the guest room like nothing had happened. He almost wondered if he had dreamed the whole thing. But when he mentioned it over breakfast, she just smiled sadly and thanked him for being understanding. "I'm sorry," she said, stirring her coffee. "I know it's weird. I can't be alone right now. The divorce has been really hard." He looked at his sister across the kitchen table. She looked tired with dark circles under her eyes. Her usually neat hair was messy and she kept fidgeting with her hands. The strong, independent woman he had grown up with seemed to have disappeared. In her place was someone fragile and scared. "Don't worry about it," he told her. "You're going through a tough time. I understand." But understanding and being comfortable with it were two different things. The second night, it happened again. Same time, same whispered words. "I need you close tonight." This time he was more awake when she came in. He watched as she carefully lifted the covers and slid into bed, making sure to stay as far from him as possible. She wasn't trying to be inappropriate. He could tell she was genuinely afraid of something. Maybe it was nightmares. Maybe it was just the fear of being alone after years of marriage. Either way, she seemed to find peace only when someone else was nearby. By the end of the first week, it had become a routine. Every night at midnight, like clockwork, she would appear at his door. Sometimes she would knock softly. Sometimes she would just stand there until he noticed her. But the words were always the same. "I need you close tonight." His girlfriend started asking questions. They had been together for 2 years, and she was used to staying over on weekends. But now with his sister in the house, things felt different. "Why does she seem so attached to you?" his girlfriend asked one Saturday morning. They were having breakfast while his sister was still asleep. "I mean, I get that she's going through a divorce, but this seems like a lot." He tried to explain without making his sister sound crazy. "She's always been sensitive. Even when we were kids, she would come to my room when she was scared. Our parents worked a lot, so I kind of looked after her." His girlfriend nodded, but he could see the concern in her eyes. "How long is she planning to stay?" That was a good question. When his sister first asked to move in, they had talked about it being temporary. Just a few weeks until she found her own place. But weeks were turning into months, and she didn't seem to be looking for anywhere else to live. In fact, she seemed to be settling in more each day. Her belongings were spread throughout his apartment. Her favorite coffee was in his kitchen. Her books were on his shelves. It was like she was making herself at home in a way that felt permanent. The midnight visits were becoming more frequent, too. What started as once or twice a week had become every single night. He found himself lying awake, waiting for her to appear. His sleep was suffering, and he was tired during the day. But every time he thought about saying something, he would see how scared she looked. During the day, she seemed to be holding herself together by a thread. She would jump at loud noises. She would get nervous when the phone rang. She barely left the apartment unless she had to. "My ex-husband used to come home drunk," she told him one evening while they were watching TV. "I never knew what mood he would be in. I got used to staying awake, listening for his car in the driveway. That explained some of it. She was still in survival mode, still expecting danger around every corner. The midnight visits weren't just about wanting company. They were about feeling safe. He started researching sleep problems and trauma online. He learned about something called hypervigilance, where people who have been through difficult situations can't relax or feel safe. Their bodies stay on high alert all the time, ready for the next threat. It made sense. His sister had been married to someone who made her feel unsafe in her own home for years. Now that she was free from that situation, her mind and body were still acting like she was in danger. But knowing the reason didn't make the situation easier. He was starting to feel trapped in his own home. He couldn't have normal conversations with his girlfriend without his sister hovering nearby. He couldn't relax in his own bedroom because he knew that at midnight he would have company whether he wanted it or not. The worst part was that his sister seemed to be getting more dependent on him, not less. She would ask his opinion about everything, from what to wear to what to eat for lunch. She would get anxious when he left for work, asking when he would be back. She had started referring to his apartment as our place instead of your place. One night he pretended to be asleep when she came to his door. He wanted to see what would happen if he didn't respond to her whispered request. She stood there for almost 10 minutes, just waiting. Finally, she climbed into bed anyway, being extra careful not to wake him. That's when he realized this had gone beyond a temporary comfort measure. His sister wasn't just scared of being alone. She had become dependent on him in a way that wasn't healthy for either of them. But how do you tell someone you love that they're asking for too much? How do you set boundaries with family without seeming cruel? These were questions he didn't have answers to. And the midnight visits continued night after night with no end in sight. 3 months had passed since his sister moved in, and the midnight routine had become as regular as clockwork. But something had changed. What started as occasional visits had turned into something he couldn't ignore anymore. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night, when he gently suggested that maybe she was ready to try sleeping alone again. The reaction was immediate and intense. His sister broke down completely, tears streaming down her face as she collapsed onto the couch. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "I can't sleep alone. Every time I close my eyes, I see his face. I hear his voice telling me I'm worthless. The darkness feels like it's swallowing me whole." For the first time, she opened up about what her marriage had really been like. It wasn't just that her husband had been unkind. He had spent years breaking down her confidence, making her believe she couldn't survive without him. He would criticize everything she did, from how she cooked dinner to how she talked to neighbors. He used to wake me up in the middle of the night just to tell me how disappointed he was in me. She whispered. Sometimes he would leave for days without telling me where he was going. I would stay awake wondering if he was coming back or if I should be relieved that he wasn't. Hearing these details made him feel sick to his stomach. His sister had always been private about her marriage, but now he understood why. She hadn't just been going through a normal divorce. She had escaped from years of mental torture. But understanding her pain didn't make his own situation any easier. If anything, it made everything more complicated. How could he ask someone who had been through so much to face their fears alone? But at the same time, how long could this continue? His girlfriend was losing patience. She had tried to be understanding at first. But 3 months of having his sister constantly around was wearing on their relationship. Simple things like watching a movie together or having a private conversation had become impossible. "She gets jealous when you pay attention to me," his girlfriend told him one evening after his sister had interrupted their dinner 3 times with trivial questions. "She acts like I'm taking you away from her." He wanted to deny it, but he had noticed the same thing. Whenever his girlfriend came over, his sister would find reasons to need his help. She would have sudden headaches or remember important things they needed to discuss right away. The worst part was that his sister had stopped trying to rebuild her life. In the beginning, she had talked about finding a job and getting her own place. But now those conversations had stopped completely. She seemed content to stay in his apartment forever, depending on him for everything. She would ask him what to wear each morning, as if she couldn't make that decision herself. She wanted his opinion on what to eat, what TV shows to watch, even which shampoo to buy. It was like she had forgotten how to be an adult. "What do you think I should do today?" became her daily question. She had no plans of her own, no goals, no interests outside of what he was doing. When he suggested she might want to look for work or maybe join a support group for people going through divorce, she would panic. "Why are you trying to get rid of me? Don't you want me here? I thought family was supposed to stick together." He found himself walking on eggshells in his own home. Every conversation felt like it could turn into a crisis. Every suggestion for independence was treated like betrayal. His sister had become like a child who was afraid of being abandoned. The midnight visits got more intense too. She would wake up multiple times per night, sometimes coming to his room 3 or 4 times. Each time she would whisper the same words, "I need you close. Please don't make me go back there alone." His sleep was completely destroyed. He was exhausted at work, making mistakes and having trouble concentrating. His boss had started asking if everything was okay at home, but the real wake-up call came when his girlfriend finally had enough. She sat him down for a serious conversation that he had been dreading. "I can't do this anymore," she told him. "I love you, but I feel like I'm dating both of you. Your sister needs professional help, not a brother who enables her to stay dependent." The word "enables" hit him like a punch to the stomach. Was that what he was doing? He thought he was being kind and supportive, but maybe he was actually making things worse. That night he lay awake thinking about his childhood. His sister had always been the sensitive one, and he had always been her protector. When she was scared of thunderstorms, she would climb into his bed. When kids at school were mean to her, he would handle it. Their parents had always praised him for being such a good big brother, but maybe being a good big brother meant something different now that they were adults. Maybe protecting her meant helping her become strong, not letting her stay weak. The next morning, he started researching therapists and support groups in their area. He also looked up information about codependency, a word he had never really understood before. What he learned was uncomfortable but eye-opening. Codependency wasn't just about addiction. It was about relationships where one person becomes overly dependent while the other becomes overly responsible. Both people get something from the arrangement, but neither person grows or becomes healthier. His sister got to avoid facing her fears and rebuilding her life. He got to feel needed and important, like the hero who was saving the day, but neither of them was actually moving forward. The midnight visits continued, but now he lay there feeling trapped instead of helpful. He knew something had to change, but he also knew that change would be painful for both of them. The question was whether he had the strength to do what was necessary, even if it meant watching his sister struggle in the short term. 6 months had passed, and life had become completely unrecognizable. His girlfriend was gone, having finally given up on their relationship after too many interrupted dinners and canceled plans. His sister had taken over not just his bedroom, but his entire existence. The ultimatum had come and gone. "Either she gets help and learns to be independent, or I can't do this anymore," his girlfriend had said. He had promised to talk to his sister about therapy and boundaries, but when he tried, everything fell apart. "You want to send me away?" his sister had cried when he mentioned professional counseling. "Just like everyone else in my life. You're abandoning me too." But it got worse than tears. Much worse. When he insisted that the midnight visits had to stop and that she needed to start sleeping in her own room, his sister's reaction terrified him. "If you make me go through this alone, I won't survive it," she had whispered, her voice hollow and scary. "I can't live without knowing someone cares about me. What's the point of being alive if I'm all alone?" Those words kept him awake for days. Was she serious? He couldn't tell if this was emotional manipulation or a real cry for help. Either way, he felt trapped. How could he risk his sister's safety just to get his life back? So he gave in again. The bedroom door stayed unlocked. The midnight visits continued. His girlfriend packed her bags and left, saying she couldn't watch him destroy himself trying to save someone who didn't want to be saved. Now sitting in his apartment at 2 a.m. with his sister sleeping beside him for the 3rd time that night, he finally understood what rock bottom felt like. She had woken up scared, then again an hour later, then again just now. Each time she whispered the same desperate words, "I need you close. Promise you won't leave me." During the day, she followed him around like a shadow. She would sit outside the bathroom door while he showered. She would panic if he went to the store without her. She had quit the part-time job she had briefly tried, saying the people there were mean and didn't understand her situation. "Why do I need other people when I have you?" she would ask whenever he suggested she make friends or join activities. "You're the only one who really cares about me." He had started attending support group meetings for families dealing with mental health issues. The stories he heard there sounded eerily familiar. Other people talked about loved ones who threatened harm when boundaries were suggested. They talked about feeling guilty for wanting their own lives back. "Tough love isn't mean," one woman had said during a meeting. "Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone face their fears instead of constantly rescuing them from feeling uncomfortable." But putting that advice into practice felt impossible. Every time he tried to establish boundaries, his sister would have what looked like a complete breakdown. She would sob for hours, saying that he was the only good thing in her life, and without him, she would have nothing. The turning point came on a Thursday night when his sister showed up at his bedroom door for the fourth time in 3 hours. She couldn't stay in her own room for more than a few minutes without panicking and running back to him. "I keep thinking about all the terrible things that could happen," she whispered as she climbed into his bed again. "What if someone breaks in? What if I have a heart attack and no one finds me? What if I die alone?" Looking at her in the dim light from his alarm clock, he realized something that made his stomach drop. His constant availability hadn't helped her heal. It had made her worse. She was more afraid now than when she first moved in, more dependent, more fragile, more convinced that she couldn't survive on her own. He thought about what life had been like before his sister moved in. He used to enjoy quiet evenings reading or watching movies. He had hobbies and friends and a relationship he cared about. He used to sleep through the night and wake up feeling rested. All of that was gone now, and in its place was this strange existence where he felt more like a security blanket than a brother. His sister didn't want him to have other relationships or interests. She wanted all of his time and attention focused on making her feel safe. That night, after his sister finally fell asleep around 4 a.m., he made a decision that felt both necessary and terrifying. He was going to lock his bedroom door tomorrow night. Not to be cruel, but because he was starting to understand that his sister would never learn to cope with her fears if he kept rescuing her from them. The idea of listening to her cry and plead on the other side of that locked door made him feel sick. But the idea of living this way for years or decades made him feel even sicker. He loved his sister, but he was losing himself in trying to save her. He spent the next day preparing for what he knew would be the hardest night of his life. He researched crisis hotlines and made sure his sister had the numbers. He called the therapist he had found weeks ago and scheduled an emergency appointment for the next day. When bedtime came, his hands shook as he turned the lock on his bedroom door for the first time since his sister had moved in. Within minutes, he heard her footsteps in the hallway. Then came the gentle knock he had been expecting. "Please," she whispered through the door. "I can't do this alone. I need you close tonight." For the first time in 6 months, he didn't get up to let her in. The locked door became the beginning of the hardest month of his life. That first night, his sister had cried and pleaded for 3 hours straight. She had knocked softly at first, then pounded desperately. She had slid notes under the door, promising she would get better if he would just let her in one more time. But he held firm, even though every sob felt like a knife to his heart. He called the crisis helpline twice that night, not for his sister, but for himself. He needed someone to tell him he wasn't being cruel. Setting boundaries with someone you love is one of the hardest things you'll ever do, the counselor on the phone had told him. But boundaries aren't walls. They're guidelines that help both people grow. The next few days were chaotic. His sister barely ate or spoke to him during the day. She would look at him with hurt, confused eyes like he had betrayed her in the worst possible way. Several times she tried to guilt him into changing his mind. "I thought you loved me," she would say. "I thought family was supposed to be there for each other. But I guess I was wrong about you." Those words stung because part of him wondered if she was right. Was he being selfish? Was he abandoning her when she needed him most? But then he would remember what the support group had taught him about the difference between helping and enabling. The breakthrough came when he convinced his sister to see the therapist he had found. She only agreed to go after he promised it wasn't about getting rid of her, but about helping her feel stronger. The therapist was a kind woman who specialized in trauma and family relationships. After the first session, his sister came home looking drained but somehow different. "She says I have something called complex trauma," his sister told him quietly. "It's not just about the divorce. It goes back to when we were kids." Over the next few weeks, his sister started learning things about herself that she had never understood. The therapist explained how growing up with emotionally absent parents had taught her that love meant being needed, and that independence was the same as abandonment. "I learned to be helpless because that's when people paid attention to me," she explained after one session. "And you learned to be the rescuer because that's when you felt valuable." It was painful to hear, but it made sense. Their whole family had operated on these unhealthy patterns for decades. He had always been praised for taking care of his fragile little sister, while she had been rewarded for being dependent and needy. The midnight visits didn't stop immediately. Some nights his sister would still come to his door, but now the conversations were different. Instead of automatically letting her in, he would talk to her through the door. "I know you're scared," he would say. But the therapist said you need to practice sitting with uncomfortable feelings instead of running away from them. I'm here, but you need to try staying in your own room. Some nights it worked. Other nights it didn't, but slowly, gradually, the visits became less frequent. His sister started using the coping techniques her therapist had taught her. She learned breathing exercises and grounding techniques that helped when the panic set in. The real turning point came about 6 weeks after he had first locked his door. His sister had a panic attack in the middle of the day, something that used to send her running to him immediately. But this time she tried handling it herself first. He watched from the kitchen as she sat on the couch, breathing slowly and using the techniques her therapist had taught her. She was crying, but she wasn't falling apart completely. After about 20 minutes, she came to find him. I had a panic attack, she said, but I got through it mostly by myself. I still feel shaky, but I didn't need you to rescue me. The pride in her voice was unmistakable. For the first time in months, she seemed proud of herself instead of ashamed and scared. His sister started making other changes too. She got a part-time job at a bookstore, something she had always wanted to try but had been too afraid to attempt. The first few days were hard and she called him crying during her lunch breaks. But instead of telling her to quit, he encouraged her to stick with it. You can do hard things, he told her. You're stronger than you think you are. She also started attending a support group for people who had been in difficult relationships. At first, she was terrified to share her story with strangers, but gradually she began to find comfort in talking to people who understood what she had been through. It's weird, she told him one evening. I always thought I was the only person who felt this scared all the time. But there are other people who understand. I don't feel so alone anymore. The changes weren't just happening to his sister. He was changing too. For the first time in years, he started doing things for himself again. He picked up hobbies he had abandoned. He started exercising regularly. He even reached out to his ex-girlfriend not to get back together, but to apologize for how things had ended. I understand now why you had to leave, he told her during their coffee meeting. I was so focused on rescuing my sister that I forgot how to be a partner to you. She was gracious about it, though they both knew too much had happened to fix their relationship. But the conversation helped him understand how much he had lost by making his sister's needs the center of his entire world. The midnight visits became rare, maybe once or twice a week instead of every night. And when they did happen, they were different. His sister would knock and ask permission instead of just appearing. Sometimes he would invite her in to sit and talk. Other times he would encourage her to try coping on her own first. I still get scared, she admitted one night when she had successfully stayed in her own room during a bout of anxiety. But I'm starting to believe that I can handle being scared without falling apart completely. The relationship between them was becoming healthier, but it wasn't easy. There were setbacks and arguments. Sometimes his sister would slip back into old patterns of helplessness. Sometimes he would slip back into old patterns of rescuing. But they were both learning that love didn't mean eliminating each other's discomfort. Real love meant supporting each other while still maintaining their own identities and independence. 1 year had passed since that first midnight visit, and everything looked different now. His sister lived in her own small apartment just 15 minutes away, a place she had chosen and furnished herself. She had a full-time job at the bookstore and had even been promoted to assistant manager. But perhaps most importantly, she slept through the night in her own bed most of the time. The transformation hadn't been easy or straightforward. There had been setbacks and difficult moments throughout the year. Some weeks were better than others. Some nights she still struggled with anxiety and loneliness. But the desperate, dependent person who used to crawl into his bed every midnight was gone, replaced by someone who was learning to be strong. I never thought I could live alone, his sister told him during one of their weekly coffee meetings. I was so convinced that I needed someone else to survive. But it turns out I'm actually pretty good at taking care of myself. She had started painting again, something she hadn't done since high school. Her small apartment was filled with colorful canvases that showed a side of her personality he had forgotten existed. She was making friends at work and had even started dating someone, though she was taking it very slowly. I want to make sure I'm choosing to be with him, not just running away from being alone, she explained. My therapist says that's an important difference. The midnight visits still happened occasionally, maybe once or twice a month when she was having a particularly difficult time. But now they looked completely different. She would call first, asking if it was okay to come over, When she arrived, she would explain what was bothering her and what she had already tried to do to help herself. Sometimes he would invite her to stay and talk. Other times he would encourage her to try her coping strategies at home first. But the desperate quality was gone. She no longer acted like her survival depended on his constant availability. "I had a panic attack last night," she told him during one such visit. "But I used my breathing exercises and called the crisis line when it got really bad. I got through it. I'm proud of myself for handling it, but I wanted to tell you about it because you're important to me." That conversation showed him how much things had changed. She was sharing her struggle with him by choice, not because she couldn't cope without him. She wanted his support, but she didn't need his rescue. His own life had changed dramatically, too. He had started dating again, someone he met through a hobby group he had joined. This new relationship was different because he had learned how to maintain boundaries and keep his own identity while caring about someone else. "I like how independent you are," his new girlfriend told him one evening. "You care about your family, but you don't let their problems take over your whole life." He also had a better relationship with his sister now than he had ever had before. When she was constantly dependent on him, he had felt more like a parent than a brother. Now they could have real conversations about their lives, their hopes, and their struggles, without everything revolving around her fears. "I'm sorry for what I put you through," his sister had said during one of their recent visits. "I know it wasn't fair to make you responsible for my happiness. I was so scared of being abandoned that I almost drove you away by clinging too tight." Those words meant everything to him, not because he needed an apology, but because they showed how much his sister had grown in understanding herself and her patterns. The last midnight visit in their story happened on a particularly difficult night when his sister was dealing with stress at work and anniversary grief from her divorce. She called around 11 p.m. sounding shaky. "I'm having a really hard night," she said. "I was wondering if I could come over for a while. I tried my usual coping things, but I think I need some extra support tonight." When she arrived, she looked tired and stressed, but not desperate. They sat in his living room and talked about what was bothering her. She cried a little, but they were healthy tears, not the hopeless sobbing of someone who felt helpless. "Can I stay tonight?" she asked after they had talked for an hour. "Not because I can't handle being alone, but because sometimes it's nice to be around family when you're going through something hard." He agreed, but instead of automatically offering his bed, he set up the couch with blankets and pillows. She smiled at this arrangement, understanding what it meant. "This is perfect," she said. "I feel supported, but I'm not running away from my feelings or making you responsible for fixing them." They watched a movie together, something light and funny that helped lift her mood. When they were ready for sleep, she hugged him goodnight and settled onto the couch while he went to his own bedroom. Around 2 a.m., he heard some movement in the living room and wondered if she was having trouble sleeping. But instead of getting up to check on her or invite her into his room, he listened carefully. He could hear her moving around quietly, probably getting some water or using her breathing exercises. After a few minutes, everything went quiet again. She had handled whatever was bothering her on her own. The next morning, she was making coffee when he woke up. She looked rested and calm, very different from the anxious person who had arrived the night before. "I woke up around 2 with some anxiety," she told him over breakfast. "But I just did my breathing exercises and reminded myself that I was safe. I fell back asleep pretty easily." That moment represented everything that had changed between them. A year ago, that middle-of-the-night anxiety would have sent her running to his bedroom in a panic. Now she had handled it herself while still feeling supported by his presence in the house. "I'm proud of how far you've come," he told her as she was getting ready to leave for work. "I'm proud of how far we've both come," she replied. "We learned how to love each other without losing ourselves in the process." As he watched her drive away to her own life, her own job, her own apartment, he reflected on how much their relationship had improved. She no longer whispered desperate pleas for him to stay close. Instead, she chose when and how to include him in her life, and he did the same. The midnight visits had taught them both important lessons about the difference between love and dependence, between helping and enabling, and between being close and being consumed by each other's problems. Their story didn't end with perfect healing or the complete absence of struggles. His sister still dealt with anxiety, and he still sometimes caught himself slipping into old patterns of wanting to fix everything for her. But they had both learned healthier ways of relating to each other and to their own emotions. Most importantly, they had learned that real love sometimes means letting people face their fears and grow stronger, even when it would be easier to just make the fear go away. The midnight whispers had been replaced by honest conversations. Desperate clinging had been replaced by chosen connection, and codependency had been replaced by genuine care that allowed both of them to flourish as individuals. Their story proved that even the most entangled and unhealthy family patterns could be changed with patience, professional help, and the courage to do what was truly loving instead of what felt immediately comfortable.